So I'm curious, John, as to how you went from a law student and then deciding to leave university and venturing into journalism.
Sadly, it was the university that decided I should leave the university.
Okay.
Um, so I went down in disgrace. And uh, I really was at a loss to know what on earth to do. I mean, initially, of course, I thought I must try and get in somewhere else, but I thought that's very unlikely. Um, and I had a very supportive cousin, my cousin Peter Snow, who is
Mm.
also a journalist, and he knew somebody who was at Oxford with him, and she, here we are, see family connections, but she said that she worked for somebody called Lord Longford, and Lord Longford was a big social reformer, and it, it, both eccentric and wonderful. Anyway, he had a day centre for homeless and vulnerable young people in London, and the guy who'd been running it had had a nervous breakdown, and she said, "Look, he's looking for somebody to run this place. Shall I suggest you?" And I said, "Oh, by all means," or little having the slightest understanding as how on earth I would deal with such troubled kids.
Mm.
But it was in Covent Garden. No, the original one was in Soho. No, I was summoned to Soho, to the day centre, and there waiting to interview me with a view to whether I could actually have the job or not was Lord Longford, Jack Perfumer of the Perfumer scandal,
Mm.
and Rear Admiral Sir Matthew Slattery, who was the head of British Airways or British
Oh
Overseas Airways.
my gosh.
And they grilled me, and I got the job. And for 3 years, I threw my everything into leading this place of great suffering and deprivation. It was a terrible time on the drug scene. A lot of kids were using barbiturates, heroin, etc.
Mm.
Um, Work was not plentiful, um, and but we developed a fabulous team of about a dozen people. We managed to get residential accommodation, etc., as well as the day centre, and it was amazing work. But at the end of it all, I was exhausted and
Mm.
needed to do something else. And it was the birth of commercial radio. LBC, London Broadcasting, was the first commercial radio station. And the self-same cousin, Peter Snow, said, "You should put in for that." I thought, well, really? So I did. And interestingly, their problem was that the only people who'd ever worked in commercial radio were people from New Zealand, from Australia, from America, from Canada, but nobody from Britain.
Oh, how
And
it's.
they needed somebody who would deliver the news on LBC, which was, after all, a sort of news station,
Mm.
who wouldn't necessarily be a transatlantic or, you know, colonial voice. And so I got the job, just reading the news. But of course, it was only a few months before I broke out and started reporting. And my greatest boon, which it is to this day, is having a bicycle. In those days, the IRA was bombing its way across London,
Of course.
and the traffic would back up. There'd be panic, there'd be fire engines, all the rest of it. But you could nip through on your bike and get
Mm.
right to the seat of the crime.
Mm.
And we had walkie-talkies that we used to broadcast on. So I'd actually be pedaling along, and so I could see the smoke, and it was quite sort of dramatic stuff. And all I did was, I didn't know anything at all. What I did know is what I could see. So
Mm.
I reported what I could see, and that was the beginning of my reporting life.
And I suppose what you could see and what you could feel
Yeah,
as
yeah,
well. I mean, the senses being a large part of the story.
yeah, absolutely. So that was my break into journalism,
So
and
it seems in a way that you're pretty fearless. You know, you seem to have planted yourselves in situations, you know, of thinking, well, I don't know anything about this, but I'll give it a go. I don't know anything about this, but I'll give it a go. And you know, has this been Is this a large part of who you are, willing to explore the unknown, push the
Evelyn,
barriers?
this is the gorgeous thing about it. Ignorance was by far the best equipment. Once you accepted to yourself that you knew nothing, then everything was an exploration and had to be checked and the rest of it. And that actually makes you not a bad journalist, actually. You haven't taken anything for granted. And you haven't sort of thought, well, I think it was this, or I saw somewhere it was that. And no, if you were going to succeed, and I knew how ignorant I was, you needed to check stuff and really. And the other thing was, you tried to get to the actual source who could tell you what was going on, the policeman, the vicar, whoever it was, the doctor, who could, fill in what you didn't know of what was happening.
And I suppose it goes back to what you were mentioning about the gentleman from Gaza and the Mars is sourcing those people, the little bits and pieces that make that story come alive.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we're blessed with wonderful human beings who are all different and very often have an absolutely wonderful individual story to tell. And they may not be very good at telling it, but you can do that. They need just to supply you with the facts and the information that has affected whatever it is that they're doing that you're reporting upon.
So you have your mother's piano. Do you still have your bike?
I have a better bike than I had then, but I certainly do, absolutely. And I ride every day. I ride to and from work and at work, within reason. I mean, there's no point living in a great city like London if you can't move around. And the one thing about a bicycle is you can move anywhere as long as you've got a bit of puff.